I kind of know you a little bit. We've been doing this a few years. I think we started back about 2007, 2008, and what a difference it has made in the last 15 or so years. But here we are talking a great game of college football. Yeah.
I always love to be with you, buddy.
Thank you. Let me get right to a story that I think is really in the news now. The new Netflix series. It's a third in a series of Unsolved on Netflix, and it features the Florida Gators, and it's 4 seasons. It's kind of dicey a little bit, but it's the inside story of what went on with those teams in 2006 and 2008. And as we go back now and look at that, there's a lot of things to observe, Urban. What have you learned by doing that series and doing that show with Netflix?
Yeah, at first, they came to myself and a few other players, Tim Tebow, and some other guys, and at first I said I'm probably not going to do it, because I want the 2008, 6 and 8, those national championship teams were one of the greatest collection of players and people that I've ever been around. So, but then I started thinking about it, and I did, a lot of times I've seen articles where they interview a guy that was kicked off the team or disgruntled people, and that's not what this is about. They are talking to the best players. I wish the Pounceys would have been involved, and I wish Percy. Those three are not. But really, you got Major Wright, you got Ahmad Black, you got Dallas Baker, Brandon Saller. You got incredible players and people and leaders. So it's going to be outstanding. I had no idea they had so many behind the scenes video of whether it be locker room, sideline. I had no idea that the cameras were running all the time, and there's some great storylines in here and some great moments. I mean, you're talking about the blocked field goal against South Carolina and Steve Spurrier when he came back to the swamp. You're talking about some, you know, arguably the greatest player of all time, Tim Tebow, Percy Harvin. I still think is the best I've ever been around. So I just can't wait for the fans to see it.
It's kind of how the sausage was made, as they say. And I want to drill down on that just for a second because I think as we look at these teams and these programs and how some have disintegrated, how Nick Saban has remained pretty much on top of this long. You want to know how did they do it? Urban, the pieces all came together for you. Kind of talk about how that was. I know you were a recruiting maniac, but it didn't start off with that great, and you knew you had to go get players. How did you build those teams? Simply put, besides recruiting, obviously we know that, and you not only build them, but you developed them and you held them together, and they had an incredible run. You came this close to unseating Nick Saban. If you win that third matchup, they're going to be talking about you as the guy who has a dynasty. But talk about how you made that team and how you kept it on top.
Well, obviously you win with great players, but it's more than that. It's the development, and I think great players number one. But I think the most, and I said this just recently, that the most underlooked people or unvalued people, not unvalued because they're getting paid now pretty well, but the assistant coaches were phenomenal. I made a comment on another show I just did that, who's some of the unsung heroes, and I mentioned Brandon Spikes. He wasn't exactly unsung, but Charlie Strong. Without Charlie Strong, we don't do that. We don't win 2 or 3 championships. You have to have a great staff. And I not only had I had one of the best staffs in college football history. A lot of them went on to be successful head coaches, and I think the fact that we recruited at a level that obviously there's great recruiting now, but it was 24/7, 365, and the recruiting was as intense as the practices, that work ethic. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got kind of burnt out. I look back now, and I never took a day off. There's not one day I took off from being the head coach at Florida. A lot of times people shut her down, and I couldn't do it. We're on vacation, and my wife tells us stories that of the 10 hours, 8 of them I'm spent recruiting, and we're not exaggerating. And that's documented, and that's how you got great players. We followed the rules. There was none of that nonsense going on, buying players and all that crap. But we got great players because great players beget great players. They want to win. They want to play with the best. And when you start getting the Spikes and the Tebows, they became magnets. And you look at the rosters on those teams, and you get to watch this Netflix. You're going to see how great those players were.
That comes out, I believe, the first one in the middle of August, right around the third week in August. I can't wait to see that. But back to your point about getting the great players like Spikes and Tebow and on, we can name go on forever, the Hall of Famers. The question becomes to the average person, how did you do that? You didn't pay them money, you didn't have NIL, you didn't like you recruited like hell and took every advantage you could take right up to the edge, but you didn't cross that line. So I'm thinking about now what Billy Napier is doing, trying to get things going. Gator fans want to know why can't he get this thing rolling. Now he's got their transfer portal, but you didn't have it. Tell me if you were telling, and I know you talked to Billy recently because he quoted you on a couple of things at Media Day. Talk about what you have to do now in this modern world to get great players to come to your program.
I'm the wrong guy to ask, buddy. I think you look at Kirby Smart. Right now, you got Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia that just, and USC seems to be doing it well. And I've heard, I hear stories about, whoever pays the most, and I hope that's not happening. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's not because I'm not that close with it. I know recruiting Wes, when you talk about why would a player come to Florida in the 2000s, in 05, 06, 07, we had a premium placed on academics. So we pushed academics very hard. Our graduation rate was very high. We started the Real Life Wednesdays, actually, in Florida, trying to get job fairs. And, parents like that, players like that you care for them beyond football. The second is the promise of championships. If you stick it out, you're going to win. And we started winning, and they believed it. People want rings. And then the third one is the promise and the allure of the NFL. We started having first rounder after first rounder, and they saw the first round draft pick signing for $15 million, and they deserve that. If you're going to come get developed by guys like Mick Marotti and our coaching staff, you will go in the NFL. That's a promise. And those were the three bedrocks of our organization, and it worked.
Something seems to have worked for Kirby Smart. Seems like he's got more than his fair share of 4 and 5 stars. But I want to bring up a point here, if I may, because I think I know this history pretty well. You can be rolling like he's rolling out with back-to-back national championships, and kudos to Kirby for that. And he thinks he can win a third with the schedule he's got. If that plays into it, he will. But I want to get to a point about things that go wrong beyond your control. I can think of your career particularly, just a couple of ticks here and there. Let's say, what ifs? What if Carlos Dunlap doesn't imbibe that night at his teammate's birthday party, not even a drinker, and winds up passed out at a stoplight in Gainesville and gets picked up and hauled in, and you had to take him off the team right at a time you're playing Nick Saban's team, among other things. Look at Kirby's problem he's got now with players getting arrested and going speed racing and what have you. It's the culture slightly changing. There's almost a sense of entitlement that comes on there after you win a couple. If you could give Kirby or anybody advice on watch out when you're successful because it's so easy to fall off that mountain, what would you say?
Well, I think, you saw, you just go down the run of Alabama, and they certainly had some off-field issues, and they rebounded back and did the right thing. And, I think Georgia will do the right thing. Florida, we had some off-field stuff. And what happens is when I notice, and obviously there's very serious stuff that happens, and we've had serious stuff. Alabama had serious stuff over the years, and, you can go on and on. LSU did, and it's just you're dealing with young people, and you're dealing with, once you reach the top, the amount of exposure that these players get. I mean, it's godlike what happens to these players, and I've witnessed it. I remember saying I want to take these players away and go on a desert island, and because if we keep everything contained and focused on the team and not the outside, and it's impossible to do. You can say certain coaches, certain staffs have done a good job. They certainly have, but there's always going to be issues. There will always be issues, and you just got to handle them and do the right thing that you believe is right. And I noticed Nick Saban, and I haven't followed Kirby as closely, but we took the approach because early in my career, I would dismiss players all the time. And then I had an issue happen where, we dismissed a player, and a couple years later, he took his life. And that changed me forever. I mean, that changed my staff. I was not going to get rid of a player. I was going to do everything we can to change that player and to correct issues and to build a foundation so they could live a life. But yanking away any structure from some of the players, that's first of all, I don't believe that at all. And for someone to throw stones at something like that, that's you don't do that. And so I think it's just something you got to manage. You got to really watch. You got to discipline. You got to do the right thing that you think's right as a leader.
Yeah, I remember the story of Stunning Lubick talking about the prize prospect who left because of you and how hard it hit you there. And you were a hard ass. They used to call you a young Bear Bryant back in those days. But after the incident you're talking about, we know who it was, the kid from Daytona Beach that took his life. You overcorrected in some regards. You tried to save everybody. And that's a good thing to err on. But anyway, you go through in life, you make changes, and you adapt, you adjust. You have no apologies to make for anything. I just had to remind myself of the unbelievable record. I knew what you did at Florida, 65-15, two national champions. I know what you did at Ohio State, national championship. I couldn't believe it. I went back and looked. You never lost. You never won fewer than 11 games at Ohio State in 7 years. That's unbelievable, the record that you had there and things that you did. And people know now how hard it is to do that. Ask Billy Napier. Look what he's got to do now, following the legacy of Spurrier and you. And he's a good football coach, I think, a sound fundamental guy. The question is now, can he find the secret in the dirt, digging in the dirt, trying to figure it out, hard work? If you could give him a little more advice, what would you say?
I try not to do that. However, I know he's working his work ethic is an A plus. I have still so many friends down there, and I hear Brandon Spikes is going to be part of the program, and I know Verno Brown was, and now he's no longer. But Florida deserves the best. They got a great coach. He's a winner. He won at the at the little bit lower level before. The problem is you don't have time. That's my biggest concern. Is momentum used to be worth it. I used to say momentum with a young team was worth 10 points. Momentum with the older teams were 7 points. That's in a game. Forget about the over time. And Chuck Heater, the great assistant coach, when we beat Florida State 34-7 in my first year, that was a changer. If we would have lost that game, we would have went to 8-4 that year, and the Boo Birds would have been out. The momentum would have been lost. We won that game 34-7 against Coach Bowden. In the locker room, the University of Florida changed that day. And I had more people, everybody in that locker room was trying to commit to be part of that team. And that's when recruiting just became, elite. And that team it changed. And so he needs that moment. When they beat Utah last year, that was one of those moments. But this year, they've got to have 3 or 4 games where, they beat someone they're not supposed to beat. And they got to capitalize on that in recruiting.
Yeah, great point. Graham Mertz, you've seen him play. You think a lot of him, don't you?
I do. I thought his freshman year, we all did. He was phenomenal. I recruited Graham Mertz out of Kansas City, Missouri, and I love the guy. He's a very talented guy, and they got to surround. I just don't know what they have around him.
Yeah.
The quarterback, as I've said many times, he gets way too much blame and way too much glory. What's the one common denominator of every great quarterback? Great receivers.
Yeah.
It's the one. So I don't know. I don't know all that. I haven't studied Florida, but I've witnessed quarterbacks who are very talented.
Yeah.
They'll struggle with that.
They got a couple of guys to watch. Ricky Pearsall and some of the freshmen are really good. Anyway, final for you, because I know you're running. By the way, Steve Spurrier said winning the Clemson game at Duke, if he hadn't won that game, he would never gotten a job at Florida. So one game can make a big difference, as you point out, the FSU game, had it gone the other way. Okay, you're back now again on Big Noon Saturday with your boys. You got some picks to make during the next couple of weeks when it starts. Obviously, the Big Ten. I know you got your hearts in obviously Ohio State, but Michigan looks like the team to beat.
Yeah, they got the quarterback coming back. The Buckeyes got to go to Ann Arbor. Jim Harbaugh and his staff has done phenomenal. What they've done is they've built from inside out, which that appeals to me. You look at Florida, we got a lot of credit for our speed, but that offense line was ridiculous. There were NFL draft picks all over the place. The defensive line was phenomenal. So football, I know it's transitioned, it's changed a little bit more to, kind of a wide open, throw the ball quite a bit. But at the end of the day, if you can control the line of scrimmage, I think you win. There's going to be every once in a while a team that can't control line of scrimmage and win. That's not consistent. So the team in the SEC, the team in the Big Ten that has the best offensive line, the toughest group that can control the ball when they have to, they win. And right now, they did that last year, the Wolverines. So it's a tough out right now. They got a good offense. I go back to their offensive and defensive line coaches need to be commended.
Which brings up the point of the shorter clock now. The fact the clock doesn't stop like it used to. If you can run the football, which Billy Napier thinks he can do, by the way, how does that change things? If you can control the football, Urban, that's old Woody Hayes football, all of a sudden your defense gets off the field. Things change when you run the football.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm that old school. We did the spread offense. We brought the spread offense to the SEC and really brought it to the country in 2001. But we were not the spread that threw it all over the place. We were going to be 50. At the end of the day, we wanted to be run for 250 and pass for 250. When we did that, we never lost. And you take care of the ball. So I think the game changes, but I don't know, buddy. I'm just so old school about the toughness piece and the ability to turn around and hand that ball off and get yardage. I don't know if that is in the college game. I don't know if that's ever going to change.
All right, one more for Urban Meyer. Big Noon Saturday starting soon. Don't forget Netflix special coming up. We're going to watch that. And, of course, right here on our show on Fridays, Best Fridays of Football. Let's talk about envisioning or dreaming or visioning, trying to imagine what your goals are. I know at Bowling Green, when you went there, you had a long way to go to be able to dream. But you started by separating out the cliques and making it one team. And then you began to develop the feeling for what was possible. And Steve Spurrier says that was the key to his success finally at Duke, was he got his team to set goals. You're a goal setter. What does that mean? What's the difference between envisioning something and dreaming something?
I think that's a great conversation. I wish we had 2 hours. I speak on this quite a bit. And the one thing that we never had was win the national championship. We never said that. And the older I got, even we're playing the day before the national championship, I didn't talk about it. You got to think this is a psychology part of me that I'm a trained I went to college for psychology, and I studied it my entire life. Is that it's unimaginable to say, let's go win you can't. The Florida Gators right now can't win a national title, but can't they? If you can maximize your team and maximize our goals, were simply you give us the very best version of you as a player, and then our coaching staff. Once again, the players get all the blame. The coaches are responsible for those players. So I would challenge our coaches daily. These players deserve the very best, and I watched closely. If they were not getting the very best from you as a coach, that was a tough day for that coach. So we never talked about win this, win this, win this. It was always the best version of you, and if not, we got to have a meeting and find out why that's not happening. So once again, if I'm Billy Napier, if I'm Ryan Day, if I'm whatever, which we've done for many, many years, and I did at Bowling Green, it was our job. They were 1-10, I believe, the year before we got there. What are we going to say? Go 2-10? We didn't say that. We said, you know what? God gave you great talent. Let's use that stuff, man. Let's push it to the point where you don't want to go anymore. And as the great saying goes, it's called the edge, and the edge is where average stops, elite begins. Our job as a coach was to push that player and that team to the edge.
Great stuff from Urban Meyer. Coach, thanks so much for being on. Look forward to our Fridays in football this year and also watching you on Big Noon Saturday. All the best.
And, buddy, I love you and condolences to you, man. I know you lost your loved one and the soul of your life, so I love you and I look forward to being with you.
Thank you, Urban. I appreciate that very much.